at number 10, Sonic drowning. Most wouldn't imagine a Sonic video game to be scary, but ask anyone who grew up playing the Sonic Sega Genesis titles, especially the first two, and they'll likely tell you how at one point or another the Sonic drowning music traumatized the crap out of them. Considered one of the scariest gaming moments of that generation, when players take Sonic through the underwater portions of various stages, if he's under for too long, he'll begin to lose air, and a timer will start counting down, paired with some very nerve-wracking music. Needless to say, it's not pleasant, and Sonic drowning is a visual that has stuck with many players fond of those original titles for years. And at number 9, Earthbound and Gygus. Earthbound is filled with surprisingly dark moments. Gygus, the final boss of the game, is memorable for many reasons, one of which is its terrifying aesthetic. Called the embodiment of evil and the universal cosmic destroyer, Gygus is a sinister alien who wants to sentence all of reality to eternal infinite darkness. Many see it as a disturbing figure, and some even believe that its image is the outline of a fetus. There's a ton of theories that have spawned from the character based on why it is so evil, psychoanalyzing the villain, and interestingly enough, Gygus' image was inspired by one of the developer's childhood memories of walking into a movie theater accidentally and seeing a rape scene. And at number 8, Arkham Knight's Man-Bat. DC's Batman has always been a dark character, ever since his conception in 1939. His villains are fitting of his often grim nature, with some of them looking as if they crawled out of a horror movie themselves. So it would make sense that the Arkhamverse video games would follow suit, and feature some pretty scary interpretations of the iconic characters. Enter Man-Bat, a character who made an appearance in Arkham Knight and freaked the crap out of everyone. You encounter the Man-Bat on a side mission called Creature of the Night after witnessing one hell of a jump scare when accidentally coming face to face with it while soaring around Gotham. The mission takes you to Kirk Langstrom's lab, the man behind the Bat creature, to discover the story behind why he is the way he is now. You end up chasing the Man-Bat through the skies of Gotham, transforming him back to his human form via an antidote that you need to administer several times, each just as horrifying as the last. And at number 7, Max Payne and his nightmares. Being a Rockstar game, it shouldn't be much of a surprise that Max Payne pushed boundaries at the time of its release. The game begins with us seeing his 6-month-old dead daughter. While that one could take the cake, one of the other more intensive moments in the title is when Max begins to have terrifying nightmares, thanks to the murder of his wife and daughter at the hands of junkies using a new experimental drug. It takes the game in a very different direction, with the player gaining a sense of helplessness as Max navigates what feels like a horrifying funhouse, structured all around the things that he's lost, especially his baby daughter. And don't even get us started on the sound design either, it's some freaky stuff. And at number 6, GTA 5's Ghost Woman. Speaking of Rockstar games, the Grand Theft Auto series is yet another title to push boundaries, although it rarely ventures into horror territory. But sometimes certain side missions have an air of mystery to them, like the unnamed side mission in which you solve a murder around Lenora Johnson, a Vinewood starlet who was abducted, tortured, and murdered by Peter Dreyfuss in 1975. She was heavily mutilated with her hands and feet cut off, incisions on her body, portions of her thighs sliced off, parts of her face missing, and more. You later find evidence that it was Peter who confessed what he did in the letter, claiming it was for artistic purposes. He also sent pieces of her body to her family, also for artistic inspiration. The letter has been torn up in 50 scraps of paper that you find, and as Franklin, a new mission is unlocked in which you can confront him and even instate some vigilante justice if you so choose. Moving on to number 5, Arkham Asylum's Scarecrow. Throughout the game, you experience 3 Scarecrow hallucinations courtesy of his fear toxin, and they're all pretty darn terrifying. There's one moment in the morgue where you open up the body bags containing your dead parents who guilt trip you. The boss battle with Scarecrow has you navigating a wreckage of a building, keeping out of sight from the nightmarish villain who has grown immensely in size. Another moment brings you back to the alleyway where Bruce Wayne's parents met their end, filled with screams and the sound of gunshots, culminating in you becoming the child version of Bruce, almost helpless as you walk through the darkness and face the Scarecrow yet again. And lastly, after the game seemingly glitches, you find yourself trapped in another nightmare hallucination, in which you become the Joker, then Batman again, witnessing your death and coming back from the grave to face off against the villain one last time in the ruins of Arkham. Plus, the Scarecrow's aesthetic is also a whole lot to take in too, and definitely looks like he'd fit right in with the horror genre of games. And at number 4, The Last of Us, Ellie kills David. There's a lot of scary moments in The Last of Us. Literally every encounter with a clicker is borderline terrifying, especially in moments like fixing that generator towards the beginning of the game when they just rampage towards you unexpectedly. But they aren't the only things in the game that left us feeling anxious and afraid. Many humans in the world of The Last of Us are possibly even scarier than the infected with what they're willing to do to survive. One of those humans is David, a man you encounter in the winter chapter of the game when Joel is injured. David ends up going on a hunt to kill Ellie and Joel, with Ellie needing to find medicine in order to bring Joel back to good health. The winter chapter ends with Ellie fighting against David, which is nerve-wracking enough as you navigate around a building engulfed in flames. But at one point towards the end, David gets on top of Ellie right before she murders him, implying that he may have tried to rape her. Joel arrives just as Ellie has killed David, quite brutally, with Joel trying to calm her down after the traumatic experience. And at number 3, Ocarina of Time, Dead Hand. Dead Hand is one of the mini-bosses in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and it appears twice in the game, once in the Shadow Temple and once in arguably the creepiest level of the game, the bottom of the well. Dead Hand is a sluggish, blood-covered ghostly creature that looks like a giant zombie head. It has several disembodied hands sticking out of the ground that try to grab hold of you so it can attack you. Essentially, the hands attack its prey and hold it tightly while it slithers out to attempt to eat you. It's a terrifying boss battle, and many have theorized that the disembodied hands are actually from Dead Hand's previous victims, whose remains are buried in the ground beneath you. Moving on to number 2, Fallout 3's Andale Mystery. Being set in a post-apocalyptic world, it should be no surprise that Bethesda's Fallout series has a wee bit of terror weaved into its narrative. Take a look at some of the foes that you encounter in the wasteland and try to claim that you have never been a little freaked out by some of the abominations lurking around the open world title. But perhaps one of the creepiest moments in the series comes from Fallout 3 courtesy of Andale, a place whose claim to fame is being the winner of the best town in the USA contest. After some investigating of the town, you'll understand why the claim was so suspicious. Andale is actually a haven for cannibals, and turns out that the citizens of the town have their eyes on you as their next meal. In order to avoid being someone's dinner, you have to accuse one of the people in the town of being a cannibal, which will force you to go around, kill everyone, and then escape for good. I guess it's better than getting eaten. And finally, in at number 1, Majora's Mask, The Moon Crash. Existential dread, anyone? The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask has been speculated to be a giant metaphor for the stages of grief. It's a title that contains a lot of dark imagery and an even darker subtext, with the ever-lingering threat of the countdown of when the moon will collide with Termina. Regardless of whether you are unlucky to see the dreadful cutscene in which the moon crashes into Termina and destroys everything, or if you were just witness to the inevitable ticking countdown and the moon hovering above, needless to say, the whole experience is enough to make anyone feel unsettled, especially with the moon's expression being what it is. Those eyes, those teeth, it is nightmare fuel at best. It's also one of the most depressing possible endings to a game, with Link being engulfed by flames as the world is enough.
Starting us off at number 10, we got Resident Evil and the Zombie Dogs. Although the game's graphics aren't necessarily the best, that really doesn't matter because when you're not expecting to be scared, even in the slightest, and something jumps out, you're bound to your pants. While walking through the hallways of what you'd think would be a safe space, these dogs just burst through the glass windows and start chasing you. It's not even the chase that will get you, but just the unexpected attack, as normally in these games you could sense when something is about to happen. This attack came out of nowhere, and to this day gamers are still talking about how they needed to throw out their fresh pair of undies because, well, let's just say it's never good to wear white while playing horror games. We'll just leave it at that. Moving on to number 9, we got Dead Space 2 and the Needle in the Eye. Doesn't matter how many times you played the game or watched this specific scene, it's never easy to do. When he lays down and his eyes are pried open, I can't help but think of the scene from A Clockwork Orange, which has likely scarred me for the rest of my life. Even if you haven't seen the movie, the idea of someone being held down and having their eyes opened by a machine is a scary thought. Couple that with the mission to stick a goddamn needle in Isaac Clarke, the protagonist's eye, and we've got ourselves one of the scariest horror game moments ever. As you're trying to get the needle right in the middle of his eye, Clark's heart rate starts to spike, which just adds to the intensity of the moment. His eyes start moving faster as you take longer to complete the task, and if you miss, well, it's not a pretty sight for either of you. Even if you complete the task without killing the man, it's not easy to watch, as you can see a needle make its way through his pupil. Yeah, it's gross. At number 8, Bioshock and the Dentist Office. I didn't know if I should title this one The Dentist Office or The Dentist Attack, because, well, it's just that. You walk into an old, dirty dentist's office, and at first, you see an empty chair. That's when the room starts filling with a smoke or fog, I guess it is, and you see a corpse of something laying in the dentist's chair, appearing seemingly out of nowhere. It seems this is a theme of the game, because as you make your way around the office searching the cabinets, it's not long before something else just jumps out at you. By the time you get to the corner of the room and pick up another item, it starts to fill with that same smoke or fog, and the second you turn back around, a dentist is there beating your head in. Like most of Bioshock, this is just another one of those quick jump scares, and although the dentist isn't hard to take down, I don't know anyone who actually enjoys going to the dentist, so if you're given an opportunity to beat one down, I mean, Now at number 7, we got Fear and Alma. It seems quite evident that across the board, one of the scariest things in horror movies are creepy little girls. Going back to Alma, she is just that, the ghost of a creepy little girl who haunts you throughout the game, or so it seems. In the first game, it's unclear if she's real or is able to somehow manifest herself into the mind of the game's protagonist. Either way, she appears when you least expect her, and appears to be a fan of jumping out and scaring you half to death as you climb a ladder or walk near the vents. And when you're invested in a game like this one, you tend to forget that you're being haunted or maybe chased by a creepy little girl who looks like she could be sisters with Samara from The Ring. To no surprise, that's usually when she comes out at ya, when you completely forget that she exists in the first place. Yeah, so, I mean, talk about a fun time, you know? Sit around with the friends, boom, you just shit. At number 6, we got Silent Hill 2 and the Pyramid Head intro. It seems Pyramid Head is a fan favorite horror villain, so there was no way I was going to leave him off this list. In Silent Hill 2, you're introduced to the character when the game's protagonist, James, walks in on Pyramid having his way with two mannequin looking things. I think that's what they are. At this point, he hides in the closet hoping that Pyramid there won't see him, but to no surprise, Pyramid makes his way over to said closet while dragging a corpse of whatever it was he was pleasing himself with. Yet before Pyramid can attack, James loads his pistol and starts firing shots, scaring off the triangular monster, and even though you're not in control of the game at the time, as it's a non-playable scene, it's still scary enough that you think about it quite often. And there's a reason why Pyramid Head has become such a popular character, or villain, or monster in the gaming community. He's terrifying. Halfway down number 5, we got Slender and the 8 Pages, and seeing Slender Man, of course. It doesn't matter how often you play the game, every single time that he gets close and your screen starts going fuzzy, your heart rate starts to spike. At this point, you don't need to try and spot him before he kills you, but it's usually too late by then. Even before he finds you, the idea of walking through a dark forest collecting 8 pages with just a flashlight is pretty terrifying. But as you can imagine, the visuals and audio together are what really make this a grand slam. The crunchy leaves you walk over, the footsteps in that small building, and even the fact that the flashlight's battery runs out fairly quickly, meaning you aren't using that little light the whole time. The entire game is scary, but there's nothing worse than knowing he caught up to you, and as we know, he usually does. Bringing us to number 4, PT and the Talking Fetus. Although the full game was never developed, the playable teaser was still more than enough to get people talking for years to come. Directed by the greats in Guillermo del Toro and Hideo Kojima, this was going to potentially be one of the best horror games of all time until it never saw the light of day. Although it was intended to be a part of the Silent Hill series, this teaser saw the users playing in first person, walking through dark hallways, and getting locked in rooms once they step foot inside. Although the entire playable teaser scared gamers, the one moment that really stuck out was the talking fetus, moving in weird ways while berating you, or the game's character, for getting fired from your job and turning to alcohol. The entire scene is quite scary, as the dirty sink the fetus is in doesn't even remotely describe how unsettling the entire situation is. I'd say it's something you need to experience to understand, but unfortunately the teaser was removed from the PlayStation Store years ago. However, if you do have a PlayStation with that game on it, you can sell it for a pretty penny. Now on to number 3, Amnesia, The Dark Descent, and the Water Monster. Odds are you've watched reaction videos to this sequence, but put simply, it's quite terrifying. You don't even know what's chasing you, but you know there's something coming for you, and the second you see the footsteps in the water, well, you better start going the other way. You have no weapons or any way of defending yourself, nor could you really even understand or see what's attacking you, meaning the only option left is to remove yourself from the situation. But while you run away, of course, you hear all kinds of unholy sounds, and the dimness of the entire area that you're running through just makes it that much harder, and of course, scarier. What's there not to love? At number 2, we got Resident Evil 4 and the Regenerators. These things appear to be indestructible, and although the thermal scope can help you find the parasite and take them down in an easier fashion, still they suck. Using a regular gun will do some damage, but they're called Regenerators for a reason. Aside from that, when you blow their heads off, tentacles start to grow and flail around. Well, they make these gross sounds that I wish I hadn't heard and would not recommend you guys look into. They're almost a mix of a zombie with an octopus with who knows what else. They are killable without the thermal too, but it takes a lot of bullets and potentially some fire, as I saw a few videos where these things were literally being blown up. Still, it's what nightmares are made out of. Now at number 1, we got Dead Space and the first necromorph attack. To start the game, Isaac Clarke, the protagonist, gets locked in a room separated from the rest of his team. At this point, you know everything is bound to go to sooner or later, and to no surprise, sooner. You then watch as your teammates get dismembered by these monster-looking praying mantis type things. However, when you first—
In number 10 is Home, the gunshot noise. One of the lighter entries on our list here, Home is an 8-bit game where you wake up in a house with a bummed leg and no memory as to how you got there. All you know is you need to find your wife Rachel and get back home. Throughout your journey home, you start to unravel several greater mysteries, all of which are left eerily ambiguous by the end of the game. You're entirely alone, with only a flashlight and the sounds of your footsteps. No score, just sound design, which makes the game quite creepy. So very much so that at one point towards the beginning of the game, a gunshot goes off, and it's like the biggest jump scare ever. As to where it came from or who was shot, well, that's a mystery. In our number 9 spot is Until Dawn shooting Wendigos. From the horror game Until Dawn, there's a few moments where you have to use a gun to defend yourself from Wendigos, the humanoid creatures who attack a group of friends staying at a lodge in Alberta, Canada. And in those moments, it's life or death. You need to make sure you hit them or else you'll be dead. All 8 characters in the game can be killed or kept alive depending on the decisions you make. And in this particular sequence with Chris, this. You're running through the forest for your life as Wendigos attack you, and it's real hard to shoot them all properly. Up next, number 8 is Lara Croft Rise of the Tomb Raider, and all of the violent scenes with guns. While Rise of the Tomb Raider has solid aspirations in terms of really showing some character growth for Lara aside from just being a sex symbol, the game had one flaw that many people couldn't help but notice: the fact that the violence towards Lara and her death animations played out like torture porn. There's a few instances in the game where she's brutally shot and killed, or even does the killing herself that make for a pretty intense gun moment. Although in comparison to some of the impalements in the game, it's much easier to digest. In our number 7 spot is Super Columbine Massacre RPG. This is an entry on our list where almost the entirety of the game is a scary gun moment. Built using RPG Maker 2000, this highly controversial game puts players in the roles of Columbine shooters, Eric Harris and Dylan Kelwold. The game uses digitized versions of photographs and voice samples throughout, recreating the attacks. It's disturbing despite being 16-bit, and received a ton of criticism, even though creator Danny Ladonne emphasized its purpose as an art game, with it being an expression of how he felt towards the shooting and its aftermath. Up next, number 6 is Hatred. While one can try to justify Super Columbine Massacre RPG as an art game, Hatred is a little harder to argue for. Hatred is a game where you play a misanthropic mass-killing sociopath on what he terms as a genocide crusade, and it's actually really beautifully designed. Developed by Destruction Creations, the game was supposed to be a response to the increasing trend of political correctness, politeness, and games as art within the gaming industry. While the whole game could qualify for this list, the antagonist, aka the name of the character you play, has a monologue at the beginning of his spree that ends with you starting to kill screaming NPCs begging for mercy. Needless to say, it's pretty intense. Up next, number 5 is The Walking Dead: Duck's Death. In classic Walking Dead fashion, there's a scene in season 1 of the game that features a little boy named Duck who has been infected. So the group does the only thing they can do: they prepare to shoot him. His parents want one last opportunity to say goodbye to their boy before it's done, but in the process, his mother Kat kills herself, unable to withstand the pain. In our number 4 spot is Life is Strange: Chloe is Shot. Life is Strange is an incredibly emotional game, similar to Until Dawn in the sense that the decisions you make will affect the outcome of the game and certain events. During one of the game's chapters, your best friend Chloe is shot. This happens twice actually, once by accident and once very much on purpose. Well, the first time around you can prevent her from dying, the second time, not so much. The game has a feature in which protagonist Max can turn back time, with dire consequences of course. But in this instance, Max has been drugged, and therefore can't rewind, leading to Chloe's death. Sort of. If you play the game, you'll know where that goes. Up next in our number 3 spot is The Last of Us: Sarah's Death. A lot of death on this list. The Last of Us is one of the best games out there. It manages to give you an excellent gameplay experience, all while really bringing the feel story-wise. And it does this right off the bat when we witness Joel's daughter, Sarah, dying, brutally murdered in front of him by the military, and in his arms. It's dark. In our number 2 spot is Spec Ops: The Line: White Phosphorus. While this isn't a gun in the traditional sense, this sequence still counts as pretty horrific, even though it's white phosphorus being shot out of a cannon. So white phosphorus munitions are a highly effective smoke-producing agent that is self-igniting, meaning it can do things like burn off clothes, skin, even break down bone in some cases. It's pretty deadly. So when it's used in Spec Ops: The Line, it was controversial, and incredibly effective in terms of putting the player in a morally questionable situation. You don't have a choice in the matter when using it. You have a certain amount of time to bomb the army below so you guys can get past them, all while seeing your own reflection in the screen, which gets more and more opaque as it gets foggier. Then you have to walk through the chaos you've caused. It's terrifying and disturbing all at once you see the ramifications of your actions. And for a game that felt like it wasn't really the cream of the crop in terms of being well developed, the questions it raises about morality and access in video games makes playing it worthwhile. And finally, into number 1 is Call of Duty: No Russian. In likely the most disturbing mission in Call of Duty history, the No Russian mission forces you to work with a group of terrorists whom you're infiltrating. And in order to infiltrate properly, you have to do what they say to not raise suspicion. To our dismay, that meant helping this group of terrorists shoot down a bunch of civilians at an airport. Similar to our last number, players are forced to work with a skewed moral decision as they must walk around the airport and murder innocent people. Being a bit of an all too real nightmare these days, No Russian hits too close to home for some of us.